Today, inshallah, it's a good day that we go over the topic that we will go over. As it's the beginning of Ramadan, inshallah, so it's a good time for us to learn about the fiqh of fasting. So some of the foundational rulings of practice that we should know, if we already know them, revise them, and we should make sure that we are aware of them during our fast. Now, of course, I do want to mention though that when it comes to fiqh, that questions regarding issues which are new and will continue to become new issues regarding practice of fasting or other things will continue. So the questions are unlimited, right? Questions of what we're doing in fasting and things like that regarding our practice, they are unlimited. So if maybe by the end of this session, you might have some questions which may not be answered or something like that. So you can feel always free to reach out to me or the other, inshallah, Mawlana Umrain, who's going to do the session. That if you ever have any case-specific questions regarding fasting or anything, inshallah, and we will try to help you with that. But inshallah, now I'll call Mawlana Umrain without any, we don't need any introduction. But alhamdulillah, he's actually continuing his studies and specializing in fiqh. So it's the perfect person for the job. He's alhamdulillah doing his ifta course, which when you complete this course, you gain the title of mufti, the one who is well-read and well-versed in jurisprudence and legal matters in our deen. Inshallah, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. نحمد ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. مع بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has blessed us, who has honored us, who has privileged us to be part of another month of Ramadan, to experience the blessings, to experience the showers and the rains of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, of His forgiveness, of His acceptance. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us the tawfiq to take the most benefit from this Ramadan. Ramadan is known for many different things, right? Many people know Ramadan as the month of the Quran. Many students of the madrasa, as ourselves, unfortunately, we know Ramadan as the holidays of the year. It's the time of year when there's no class. There's different reasons what people think of when they think of Ramadan. Just for the topic of our discussion, we'll be discussing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this ayah. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that fasting has been made compulsory upon you. That, O believers, O people who recognize and bring faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fasting has been made compulsory upon you as it was made compulsory upon all the mu'mineen before you. And the ulama mentioned that every nation that came before us, right, every prophet that came, every sharia that came, they had some sort of fasting in their sharia. They had some version of fasting in their laws and their divine laws, right? And the ulama go on in length and they discuss the many different benefits there are in fasting, right? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about when He talks about why fasting was made part of our Shariah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala focuses on this concept of taqwa. Now before we go into taqwa, the word taqwa comes from the word wiqaya. And wiqaya means protection. Right? So this protection can be a physical protection in which our bodies are protected from sicknesses. Right? It can be many different types of protection. But when we talk about taqwa, the concept of taqwa in of itself, right? Taqwa means that a person sees something or he realizes that there is something that may cause harm to his iman. And we're talking about specifically the concept of taqwa in this situation. That taqwa is when a person sees something that may cause harm to his iman and he avoids it out of the fear that it may cause a deficiency in his iman. Right? He's not certain that it will. It's not a sin. It's not a blatant sin, right? So he's not sure whether it's going to cause harm to his iman, but he fears that it might. Right? One simple example is like overeating. A person who eats too much can cause ghaflat, it can cause a person to become neglectful, it can cause a person to become tired and sleepy and neglect his salah and neglect his duties. It can make a person, become lazy. So if a person sees this and he realizes that overeating can be a problem, and so out of his taqwa he avoids overeating. Right? So this is an example of a person avoiding something out of the idea that it might cause harm. Right, so this is that wiqaya, this is that protection, that Sawm was made a protection for us, and comes in the hadith as well as Sawmu Junnah. Fasting is a shield, protects a person from many things, it protects a person's limbs from sins, it protects a person's heart from becoming neglectful of his duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And knowing the great nature of Ramadan, we know Ramadan has obviously much to gain from, many benefits, many blessings, but there's also a person who doesn't take the full value of this Ramadan, then he has much to lose. Right, so we have to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq. Just one hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, من أفطر يوما من رمضان من غير رخصة ولا مرض لم يقضه صوم الضحى وإن صامه. That if a person, he misses out one day of fasting in Ramadan without a valid excuse, one day of Ramadan this person does not fast, then he'll never be able to make it up, though he may fast for the rest of his life, even if he were to go and do it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he uses an interesting wording here. He says, وَإِنْ صَامَهُ. Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that fasting for the rest of your life will not be enough, even if you were to do it. Even if you actually made that effort, you wouldn't make up for that one day of Ramadan. So just some adab before we actually start into the fiqh of fasting. Just certain etiquettes to keep in mind when a person does fast. Is obviously the fasting is not only, what we know of fasting is that a person avoids food and drink and obviously their spouse's relationships. Right? So these are the things that we know we have to do. But alongside with that, a person should at all times restrain their tongue and restrain their limbs from sins, from any sort of inappropriate or lewd behavior. Right, there are many narrations in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explains that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need our hunger. Right, there will be many people that fast in the concept of fasting that we understand, that a person is not eating and not drinking, right? But they're not benefiting from their fast. Right? And it's because of these things, because the person, he's fasting outwardly, but in his heart, in his mind, he's not fasting. In his actions, in his behavior, in his speech, he's not fasting. Right, so this is some of the etiquettes of fasting, that we, be conscious of what we're doing, of what we're saying. Just a couple other things. It is important to have suhoor. It is important to eat in the morning. Many people, they don't prefer to wake up early, so they just eat later, late at night. They eat a little bit more. Right, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Tasahharu fa inna fi as-suhuri baraqa." Right, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged the ummah to have suhoor, to eat in the morning. Right, and there is barakah in the suhoor. And as Imam had mentioned in the Jummah khutbah yesterday, that shows the person's neediness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we don't try to act stronger than we are. We don't try to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how strong we are. We show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're needy. We show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we need Him in every moment of our lives. And so we fast with the etiquettes. Similarly, when it's time for the iftar, when we have iftar with dates, as we can, we recite the du'as that are masnoon, right? That there's du'as that Rasulullah has taught, there are du'as that come in hadith, as well as our own du'as. We know that time of fast, breaking the fast is the time when du'as are accepted. So the first section that we want to discuss when it comes to fasting is the intention. Right, now when it comes to Ramadan, specifically for the fasting of Ramadan, right? There's different types of fasts, but what we're going to be discussing today, just because of brevity and to keep it on time, is we're going to be talking about specifically the rulings for Ramadan. So fasting in Ramadan, the niyat and the intention needs to be made every day, right? You cannot make the intention once at the beginning of the month and suffice on that, right? So the intention has to be made from the time of Maghrib Salah the night before until the next day at midday. Right? So now what that means is, for example, last night was the first night of Taraweeh. Right? Yesterday was Friday. So from that Maghrib of Friday, a person has to make an intention that I will be fasting, right, on this Saturday. That's it. Just the person has to have it in intention in their mind. It doesn't even have to be verbal. It does not need to be spoken. But a person needs to have an intention that they will be fasting, and they have time to make this intention until what's called in Arabic, Dahwatul Kubra, right? And this refers to the midday, right? Midday meaning from the time Fajr starts, right, until the time Maghrib comes in, right? You calculate that time, how many hours, and you split it in two, right? So just as an example, if we were to say Fajr comes in at 6 and Maghrib comes in at 8 p.m., right? So there's 14 hours in between, right? So we would cut the day in half by saying 7 hours, right? So 7 hours after 6 o'clock will be 1 p.m. So meaning from Maghrib of last night, yesterday's Maghrib, until 1 p.m. today, a person has an opportunity to make the necessary intention for his fast of Ramadan. Now again, this intention needs to be made every single day of Ramadan. Right? So for an example, if a person were to be, he started the month of Ramadan, and today's his first day, he makes the intention of fasting. Now let's say today he falls into a coma, and he's unconscious for the rest of the month. Right? And he doesn't wake up until after Eid. Now after Eid, he needs to do qada of the entire month of Ramadan, except the first day. Because his intention for the first day is valid. He was conscious, he made the intention, right? His intention is valid, and so his fast on the first day, although he fell unconscious, his fast on the first day is valid. Now for the remaining days of Ramadan, he was unconscious and he was not making niyat, but it was still incumbent on him. So when he wakes up, he has to do qada of all those other days, right? Every day besides the first. One thing to keep in mind is there's a difference between ilm and irada. Right? There's a difference between knowing something and making an intention for something. Right? So a person can know that tomorrow is Ramadan and tomorrow everyone will be fasting, but that's different from making an intention that I will be fasting. Right? So it's not just enough to know that we're supposed to be fasting. A person needs to actually make a conscious effort. And if you're not sure whether you're fasting or not, right, let's talk about outside of the context of Ramadan for a moment. Right, let's say it's not Ramadan. Let's say that I want to fast this coming Tuesday. And one situation is where I say, I'm not sure if I want to fast on Tuesday or not. Or I'll say, I'm not sure if I'm fasting today or not. Right, so this is not considered an intention. A proper intention needs to be with jazm. It needs to be yaqini. It needs to be with full conviction that I am fasting. Right? So if a person is not sure, then he's not fasting. Now the other situation I wanted to mention was that if a person, again, this is outside the context of Ramadan, if a person makes an intention that I want to fast on Tuesday, right now the day of Tuesday comes and he entirely forgot. It completely slipped his mind that he was supposed to be fasting, and in the morning time he has some water, he eats something, and then an hour later he remembers that I wanted to fast today. So is he still able to fast? Because technically when he was eating forgetfully. He didn't know that, he wasn't in his mind that, I'm fasting or not fasting. So this will depend on when the intention was made. Meaning, if from the Maghrib of Monday night, if he made an intention, or if he knew in his heart with conviction that I will be fasting tomorrow, right? And he went to sleep with that knowledge in his mind, with that conviction in his mind that I will be fasting tomorrow, then his fast is valid. But that intention must have been made after the Maghrib of Monday. So if he made that intention on Monday morning or any time before that Maghrib, that I'm going to be fasting on Tuesday, and he had this conviction that I'm fasting on Tuesday, but from the time Maghrib set in, it never occurred to him in his mind, then this fast will not be valid. Right? So it's all dependent on whether the intention was made from that Maghrib the night before the fast. So that was just this topic of the niyat, of the intention. The next topic that we're going to be talking about are certain people that are excused from fasting. So there's two main types of excuse. One is a person who is traveling, a person who is a musafir. For a person who is a musafir and traveling, they are excused from fasting, meaning traveling is an excuse for a person to not fast. But it is not an excuse for a person to break their fast. Right? So if I start my fast today, right now I am not a musafir, right? I'm at home, I'm muqeen, right? If I were to go and start a journey today, and let's say later on at Zuhr or Asr time, I become a musafir, this does not give me permission to break the fast, right? Traveling is an excuse for a person. It gives the person the option to not fast. It does not give a person the option to break their fast. And that's the first thing. In terms of sickness, you see there's many things in fiqh that are left up to the person's own understanding. Right? So a person who is sick, or if a person is feeling sick. Now, I cannot tell that person how sick you are or how sick you might get. That person has their own experiences. He knows what their body is like. That person knows their own anatomy. So there are certain things in fiqh that are left up to the person who is affected. Right? So in terms of feeling sick and breaking your fast, at what point are you allowed to break your fast? Right? How sick do you have to be? So again, that's going to be left up to the person who is sick. That person themselves needs to decide that if they feel and if they have a strong feeling in themselves that if I fast or if I continue to fast, then I will either become sick, or I will, my sickness will worsen. And this has to be like a severe sickness, right? And when I'm talking about sickness, it doesn't mean like a minor headache. That won't be considered, right? Everyone gets headaches. We're talking about a severe sickness that could, be detrimental to your health. So if a person feels that this fasting will affect his health in this way, then they will be allowed to break their fast, right? And just a few examples of this can be like a woman who is pregnant, right? So if she feels that either herself or her child, similarly a woman who is breastfeeding, if she feels herself or her child will be harmed by the fasting, then they have the permission to not fast, and they can do qada of the fast later on. Another type of excuse of a person who is excused is a person who forgets, who eats unintentionally, right? I mean, he eats intentionally, but not to deliberately break the fast. He eats not remembering, not being conscious of his fast, right? So this is called nisyan. This is what a person, he forgetfully eats. Now there's a difference between forgetfully eating and mistakenly eating, right? Forgetfully eating will not break the fast, but mistakenly eating will break the fast. So what's the difference between the two? Forgetfully eating is when you're not conscious that you're fasting. You've completely forgotten, it's not in your mind, and however it is that you've broken your fast, whether it's through with your spouse or whether it's through food and drink. But the idea is that you don't have it in your mind that you're fasting. Mistakenly eating is when you are aware that you're fasting, that you know it, it's in your mind, you're thinking about it, and you accidentally eat something. Right? For example, if you're performing wudu and you're washing your mouth, and whilst you're washing your mouth, you know that you're fasting and you're supposed to be careful, but somehow water still goes down your throat. So this is mistakenly eating. So this type of eating will break the fast. Right? A person does not have to perform the kafara, right? He does not have to do the full 60 days expiation, but it will still break the fast, and the person will have to do qada of this. Now another thing to consider is when we look at our health and we want to see what kind of sickness will allow me to break a fast, then obviously we want to speak to a medical expert and we want to speak to our doctors. Now in classical fiqh, often what's mentioned is that you can't take the opinion of a non-Muslim doctor, right? But the reason that's mentioned, again in the classical texts, is that there was a different culture back then. And in those times there was a lot more warfare, there was a lot more racial prejudice, and oftentimes the non-Muslims were out to get the Muslims. And oftentimes the non-Muslims would deliberately give them advice that is contrary to their benefit. And there you'll find many ahkam and many rulings in fiqh that are based on this. Now in our society, that doesn't exist as much. And generally, when you go to a doctor, they don't care whether you're Muslim or not. Right? And their opinion and their advice to you is going to remain the same. Right? We go to a doctor and we expect professional help. So in our time, you can accept the opinion of a doctor in terms of how your health will be affected. But you cannot accept the advice of a doctor, of a non-Muslim doctor, on whether you should be fasting or not. Right? And the reason behind that is their expertise is in medicine, and so they'll understand how your body will be affected. But they don't understand fasting. And they don't understand, firstly, how important Ramadan is. They don't understand the admat. They don't understand what stature Ramadan has in Islam. And so they might take it lightly and say, well, your health's going to be affected a little bit, so maybe you should go ahead and not fast. That's one reason. Another reason is they're not even sometimes aware of how capable we are of fasting. Right? Many people, when you tell them about Ramadan, especially new Muslims, and you tell them that we fast the whole day, and they get surprised. And they say, you're not even drinking water for 12 hours. How is that possible? But we have kids doing it all the time. Right? Our whole community is constantly involved in it. So a non-Muslim doesn't have that understanding of Ramadan. He doesn't see that aspect that people are constantly involved in fasting. And so they might say that, you shouldn't fast. So the point again is that when it comes to non-Muslim doctors, you can accept their advice in medicine, but you don't accept their advice on whether to be fasting or not. The next topic that we'll be talking about is certain things, and this is probably the most lengthy one we're going to be going into, is certain things that don't break the fast. Right? We're going to be talking about things that don't break the fast, and as well as certain other things that do break the fast. So let's start with certain things that will not be breaking the fast. We mentioned that to break the fast means to either consume something, right? Either to consume something or to have relations with a person's spouse. So consuming something means there is a direct passage into your body and into your stomach, right? This is what we mean by consuming. So there will be a lot of different rulings that we're going to go over, and they're not all related, so it might feel like we're jumping around a bit, but we're just going to go through the list. So the first one we want to discuss is smoking, right? So a person who deliberately inhales smoke will break their fast. Now, similarly, if a person goes to a spa, right? And in a spa, they have certain machines where you can steam your face, and they put a mask on, and it's constantly blowing steam into your face, and it's meant as it's a certain treatment for the skin, for the pores, and all of this. So this sort of thing will also break the fast, right? Because you're deliberately inhaling the smoke or inhaling the vapors into yourself. Now there's other situations where if you're walking by someone who is smoking, right? So if you're just walking by and you're breathing normally and you're not deliberately inhaling the smoke, then that won't break the fast, right? And similarly, if you're outside and it's very dusty, it's a very dusty day and it's very windy and maybe there's sand in the air, right? And you're walking and you inhale dust, right? That's also not going to break the fast. And the difference here will be whether it was done intentionally, whether it was done deliberately, or not. If your purpose was to go there and to inhale it, then it will break the fast. But if your intention was not to do so, if your intention was, you're just in the environment, but you're not there to smoke, or you're not there to inhale, then it won't break the fast. And with this, you can understand many other things, right? If a person's cooking, right, but they're not, putting their head inside the pot to inhale the vapors, right? They're just cooking to cook food. So this won't break the fast. Similarly, if it's raining outside. If it's raining outside or if there's snow outside and a person consumes the rain, right? So this will break the fast as opposed to the dust. The dust will not. And the difference is that the dust is something that you can't really avoid. It's something that's in the air and there's no way for you to get away from it. But when it comes to rain and snow, these are things that can be reasonably avoided, right? These are things that you can, you can keep your head down, you can keep your mouth closed in these things, and so it'll be easy for you to avoid these things. So anything that can be reasonably avoided, right, then you should avoid them, and if you inhale them or consume them, then your fast will break. The next we're going to mention is if a person has a nicotine patch, right? So a nicotine patch is something that goes on top of the skin, and it's absorbed through the pores. So now, although this is something that does enter into the person's bloodstream, it's something that does affect the person. But because it's not a direct passage to the stomach, that was what we mentioned, right? Something that's a direct passage to the digestive tract. So because it's not a direct passage, it's just being absorbed through the pores, this is not going to break a person's fast, right? So the nicotine patch will be fine. And there's many other things that go along with this. For example, if a person puts surma, if he puts kuhul in his eyes, right? If he puts that surma in his eyes, then this also won't break the fast. And some people, what they'll notice is when they put that surma in their eyes, they'll notice that that surma actually ends up in their throat, right? So now you might think that this is a passage, but it's not, because it's not direct. And again, it's only being absorbed slowly. It takes time to reach the throat, right? Because it's not a direct passage. So the surma will also not break the fast. Same with eye drops. Eye drops are also fine. They don't break the fast. And also, along with that, the same category is the concept of injections. If a person takes an injection during their fasting, inshallah, they'll be fine, right? It won't break the fast. Another common one that people get, they feel like wasabis with maybe, is when a person is gargling their water, right, for wudu, and then they go to spit out that water. Once the water is spit out, right, so whatever is left inside your mouth, right, it's not going to break the fast. Often what happens is the water that we use to make wudu is cold, right? So when we spit out the water, there's still a coolness in our mouth. And a person thinks that that coolness is leftover water, right? But it's not really the water, it's just the water made our mouths feel cold. So now we think that there's water, so now a person goes through like a lot of difficulty and he tries to suck out all the saliva in his mouth and tries to spit it out. There's no need for all of that. Right? If a person spits out the water that he used once, then that's going to be enough. And then whatever is left over, the moisture left over will not break the fast. We mentioned the person's eye drops. Now, in terms of ear drops, one is just water getting stuck inside your ear. So that's not a problem. That one everyone understands. If water gets stuck inside your ear, that's not going to break your fast. The other is if you were to apply some sort of medicine, right? Whether that's going to be oil or whatever the idea is, something that you're dripping into your ear. So here there's two opinions. The classical opinion is that it does break. The modern opinion is kind of that it doesn't break. But both opinions are valid in the sense that a person can practice on either one. But just one thing to keep in mind is that if the eardrum is perforated, right? If there's a perforation in the eardrum, then there's no difference of opinion. There everyone agrees that the fast will break, right? But if the eardrum is intact, then a person who uses eardrops or something similar, then there is that difference of opinion whether or not it breaks the fast. Now, certain things in regards to a person's teeth is if you have something stuck in your teeth, right? So if you ate something and, for example, there's a piece of meat or something that's stuck in your teeth, if it's smaller than a chickpea, an unroasted chickpea, right? If it's smaller than that, right, and it's just something that's stuck in your teeth, then it's not considered food in the actual understanding in that sense. It's just going to be considered tabir, like it's just considered part of your mouth, part of the saliva. And so if you swallow that, for example, after Fajr, after the time of fasting starts, if you swallow that, then that will not break the fast. Similarly, if you find blood in your mouth, then there it's going to depend on whether the blood is more or the saliva is more. And if you can taste the blood, you can pretty much say that the blood is probably more, right? So that's another one to keep in mind. One other one that is mentioned is a woman who goes to do a Pap Smear, and that also, inshallah, will not break the fast. Now, if a person is actively eating, or he's actively, forgetfully eating, or with their spouse, and they remember all of a sudden that they're fasting, right? So if they separate themselves immediately, then their fast is valid, right? As long as the moment that they remember they stop eating, right, they spit out whatever's in their mouth or anything, then inshallah will be fine, right? The mucus that comes in a person's nostril, right, the mucus that a person finds in their throat, swallowing that mucus will also not break the fast, even if it's on the tip of a person's nose, right? Even if it's even outside the nose a little bit, as long as it's connected, right? As long as it doesn't separate from a person, then if the person snorts this and it comes back down the throat, then it will not break the fast. There's one masala that's mentioned that if you chew something, like if you chew, for example, a sesame seed, something very minute, and you chew it to the extent where you can't taste it, you can't feel it, right? And in this situation, you swallow it, right? So again, there's two things. One is that you can't feel it in your mouth, and the second is that you can't taste it when it goes down your throat. So in this situation, also, it will not break the fast. So those were a couple of things that do not break the fast. Lastly, what we wanted to mention here are things that do break the fast, right? So for example, if someone forces you to eat, right? And when I mean force, I mean actually force, not just asking you to eat. But if someone forces you to eat, then your fast will be broken, but there's no kafara, right? There's no sin for it, because it wasn't by choice. But you will have to do qada of it. Similarly, if a person uses a nasal spray, right? So if the medicine remains in the nose, then that's fine. But generally what happens with these nasal sprays is they don't remain in the nose, right? And you can put the same hukum on asthma inhalers, right? They say it's supposed to go in the lungs, but if even 1% goes into the stomach, right? It goes down the esophagus, then the fast is broken. So we'll say nasal sprays and asthma inhalers, because a minute amount does go down, does enter the esophagus. So because of that, we'll say that these do break the fast. Now, one thing to consider is that some people, when they get sick and they need to break their fast. Alright, so for example, a person needs to use an asthma inhaler. So what happens is that sometimes a person knows from beforehand. Right? If a person can feel, again, as I mentioned, that if a person has experience with their own body, they know what they feel. For example, if a person is used to getting fevers very often, if a person is used to getting epilepsy, or is used to getting asthma attack, and he knows he has certain medication that he can take to prevent it, or not prevent it, to treat it. So now, if, for example, he has the feeling that, my sickness is about to start, maybe 5-10 minutes I'll start feeling sick. So he goes and he takes the medication. He takes the medication, and as it turns out, he ended up not going through the sickness, right? Whatever it was, whether it was an asthma attack or whatever. If after taking the medication, it doesn't happen, right? So meaning he took the medication where he wasn't supposed to, right? Meaning he thought he was going to get sick, but he didn't actually get sick. Right? And so he took the medication thinking that he would get sick, but in that situation he did not. So here also, these things will break the fast, but there will be no kafara. Right? The kafara actually is only in the situation where if a person deliberately breaks their fast, and it's only for Ramadan fasts. All other fasts will not have a kafara. It's only in Ramadan, and it's only if a person deliberately eats something that's actually considered food. Right? As we mentioned, the meat that's stuck between your teeth is not considered food. Food is something that's salah al-badan, it's something that gives benefit to the body, it's something that people have desire for. And one thing more to mention about kafara is if a person breaks multiple fasts in one Ramadan, right? Here also there's a difference of opinion, right? So for example, if I broke 3 fasts this Ramadan, and I broke another 2 fasts in another Ramadan, right? So the general opinion is that I have to do 1 kafara for this Ramadan and 1 kafara for the previous Ramadan. You don't do 1 kafara for every fast that you broke. Right? So if I broke 3 fasts in 1 Ramadan, I'm not going to do kafara 3 times. I'm going to do 1 kafara, and I'm going to do 3 qada fasts. And then for the previous Ramadan, it's a separate kafara. So 1 kafara per Ramadan. Right? So I'll do 1 kafara for this Ramadan and 1 kafara for the past Ramadan, and I'll just the fasts that I actually broke, those I'll just do qada of individually. Right, there is another opinion that 1 kafara suffices for all of a person's Ramadans. So a person can practice on that as well. And lastly, I just want to mention, to go over certain things that are, they don't affect the person's fasts, but they are makruh. And again, keeping in mind the azmat and the stature and the honor and the privilege of Ramadan, a person should avoid these as well. Right? So certain things that are makruh are, for example, chewing unnecessarily. If a person has a piece of plastic, or if a person has a habit of chewing, flavorless gum, right? These things will not break a fast, but a person should avoid them. Also, tasting things, right? Whether it's like something like toothpaste would also fall under this category. Tasting things unnecessarily would also be considered makruh. And also, this one's interesting. A person who collects saliva in their mouth, right? And he drinks it with the idea that he's trying to quench his thirst. Now, although this is not doing anything that's contrary to fasting, it is contrary to the spirit of fasting. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created fasting for a maqsad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created fasting with a design. Our job is not to find loopholes. Our job is not to find ways to make it easy for ourselves. Our job is just to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us. Right? Sami'na wa ata'na. We do what we're told. Right? So this idea of collecting saliva to quench your thirst, it's a way to try to get around the difficulty of fasting. So that's, it's not going to break the fast. Obviously it's there, but it's something that should be avoided. Right? A person should, when they're fasting, they should do it with a love. They should do it with love to fast. And continuing in the makruhat, another thing that is makruh is to complain about the difficulties of fasting. And if a person is with their spouse and they know that they're not going to break their fast, right, then it's fine. But if they feel that they might, then it's also makruh to spend time with their spouse. And lastly here is to have, harshness in a person's akhlaq. Right? During fasting, a person should try as far as possible to build their akhlaq, to build their taqwa and that piety and that nearness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? As we mentioned, Ramadan is known for many things. Right? One of the names of Ramadan is Shahr al-Sabr. Right? It's the month of patience. And in Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test the person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, to see how much we actually want to get out of Ramadan. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq that when we fast, we should do it with a fervor and with patience. Right? We want to get as much as we can from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so we do it with respect, and we do it with patience, and we do it with all the adab that are taught to us in the hadith. And we fast with a consciousness, right? We keep these things in mind, that as we're fasting, the angels are making dua for us. As we're fasting, our sins are being forgiven. As we're fasting, all the rewards we're doing, they're being multiplied. Right? We keep all of these things in mind. We keep in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is answering our du'as, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is opening the doors of Jannah for us. Right? So we fast with this consciousness. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us the tawfiq to practice on what's been said and to get the most out of this Ramadan and every coming Ramadan. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.